The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. It's great to be with you again from our headquarters campus. Let me turn down my speaker on the computer there. Yes, indeed. Last day of finals for the students, so they're coming into their final exam, relieved, no doubt, and ready for some fun these next few days. We've got the graduation ball on Thursday night, and of course the graduation ceremony, the graduation brunch, all of that scheduled for Sunday. Just one email here to begin with. We watched you on this is regarding yesterday's program. You can get to all these shows, by the way, on the trumpet.com website, kpcg.fm, both of our websites there. This says, we watched you on the YouTube channel today. Thank you for the uplifting Bible study and your always insightful and encouraging words. You seemed very sobered today. Thanks again. You make our morning more uplifting. So you can see, or you can track the numbers yourself on YouTube, SoundCloud, and of course the downloads to devices. Quite a few of those. They're all on the increase. So it's nice to see the audience increasing in size, and it has been, I think, in particular, these last couple months. I was chatting with one of my colleagues here at headquarters just yesterday, and we were talking about just how ahead of the curve the Trumpet magazine has been, the Key of David, this program, and a couple of examples. We're hearing a lot in the news, more of the conservative news media, about the January 5th meeting between President Obama and all of those top intelligence officials, going back to 2017, those last few weeks before the inauguration of Donald Trump. And of course, if you've been reading the Trumpet.com or reading the Trumpet magazine or listening to this program, then you know we've been talking about that January 5th meeting for years. And the fact that Barack Obama was directing this whole operation, this corrupt investigation into a political opponent. You might recall, some of you, the timeline that we put together. Sam was working on that, I think, ahead of our ministerial conference back in 2018, maybe it was. I think that's the right date. But in any event, we were really going back and looking at the details that happened in that 40-day period between December 7th, 2016, and January 16th, 2017. And of course, right at the heart of that, you had those meetings. Barack Obama orchestrating everything, and then Jim Comey setting the trap for Donald Trump the next day. Well, now a lot of those meetings are finally getting some attention. And you have commentators that are asking, how much did Barack Obama know? How much was he responsible for? And as I said yesterday, Joe Biden was in that meeting as well. January 5th, 2017, another example is the pandemic. You can go back to the programs that we produced just a couple months ago, the last couple weeks in March. And in a lot of ways, we were a lone voice. Some of the things we were talking about and saying, and how we were exposing the media for hyping this, for setting off this worldwide panic, the pandemonium. Well, in the conservative media at least, there are quite a few that have come around and they see what the radical left is doing with this crisis and how that they're exploiting it. Look at the bill that Nancy Pelosi submitted this week, $3 trillion. All of these favorites on the radical left's agenda, they're trying to get the Green New Deal through because of this crisis. They're not concerned about people suffering from the crisis. It's all politics. And if you go back to some of those programs in late March, even in middle March, the middle of March, We've even focused in on the timeline there when the declaration of a pandemic was made, first by CNN, then by the WHO, then the national emergency, President Trump declaring that, and then all of the shutdowns began. And we were telling you, this is quite an overreaction for a disease that we really don't know a lot about. You know, yesterday they had the big hearing with Anthony Fauci. And if you heard excerpts from that, particularly Senator Rand Paul, what he had to say, he said yesterday in a hearing, a Senate hearing, what we were saying 2 months ago. It was refreshing still just to hear someone, a senator, point out the fact that as he said, to close the schools when children are at zero risk. And here you've got the good doctor, even yesterday, saying that, well, we shouldn't open schools this fall. He's still the voice that everyone looks to. And Rand Paul, we have the clips. I'll play them for you later. But he said outside of the Northeast, outside of New England, basically, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, outside of that, it really hasn't been any worse than a flu season for the rest of the country. And so how do you apply these blanket restrictions right across the country when really the epicenter is New York City? It was from day one, at least for the United States. And it hasn't spread. Not the deaths anyway. The mortality rate, it just keeps going down. And yet you heard it at the top of the hour, if you listen to the news that we get from Europe. No sign, there's no sign of this going away. Well, how about looking at the curve? Because initially, it was all about flattening the curve, and the curve has been flattened. And now everything is to be completely shut down until this disease, this one disease, not any of the other diseases. There's all kinds of diseases in the world. But this one disease, I guess it has to be completely stamped out before people can resume their daily lives and open their small businesses. These are the doctors that we put our complete trust and faith in. And they're the ones that still get the hearings, not the other ones. There's others out there saying this is ridiculous, this reaction. But they're not going to get a hearing in the Senate. It's still Dr. Fauci. But coming back to the revelations of this past week, and as I said, the trumpet being spot on from the beginning. Think about how much insight we have just because of one booklet, America Under Attack. Just that one example, written back in 2012, 2013, and what we know. And this, of course, is a dimension you don't hear anywhere, not even in conservative media. They don't obviously see. They don't see the spirit behind this. They don't understand about the spirit behind this. We have to wrap our minds around the fact that when God says the whole world is deceived, that's what he means. Think about the statement in John 8. There is no truth in the devil. He's the father of lies, and it says there's no truth in him. Well, the devil and his work through an Antiochus administration, quite a lot of that's being exposed. I think it was Molly Hemingway who said that we've learned more in the last week about this fraudulent, corrupt hoax of an investigation. We've learned more about it in the last week than we did in the last 3 years. It's been a significant week. If you're interested in evidence, if you're interested in facts, and a lot of people aren't, but if you're actually still concerned about, well, where is the evidence in all of these testimonies, in all of those hearings from 2017, I don't know which House member it was, but the Republicans made sure that as all of these Obama officials came through, they made sure that every single one of them was asked, do you have any evidence of collusion with Russia? And every single one of them said no. We don't have any evidence. And now we know this because Adam Schiff finally released those transcripts only after the White House said, you better release them or we'll do it. He didn't want those transcripts to see the light of day because he knows how condemning they are. But listen to this from Real Clear Politics. This is Charles Lipson. And he's talking here about being exposed, the Obama administration. And keep in mind, as I read this is just from yesterday, but as I read this, think about what you've read at the Trumpet, thetrumpet.com, probably 2-3 years ago, maybe more, maybe longer. He says, we've all seen footage of those carefully timed explosions that bring down antiquated buildings and clear the ground for new ones. A horn sounds, the detonations begin, the building shakes, suspended for a frozen moment, and then collapses in a vast cloud of dust. He says that, metaphorically, is what is happening to the Obama administration's legacy. They are being exposed. And so much of the commentary, finally, it's about the January 5th meeting. Meetings, plural, I should say. This article says, we're learning just how many laws, regulations, and procedures the Obama administration trampled in the process. Think about what my father wrote a couple of years ago. They're turning up no evidence on Trump-Russia collusion, but what we are seeing is a lot of lawlessness on the other side. I forget where my father wrote that. I think it was in the Saving America article. That's from 2 years ago. And think about what all of this evidence from the past week is revealing. He says here, this is real clear, each new tranche of declassified documents adds to the disturbing picture. All would have remained hidden if Hillary Clinton had won. That's almost word for word from what my father said a couple years ago. Think about the evil that would have been concealed. Think about the corruption that would have remained hidden had Hillary Clinton won. That's what they were banking on. It says here, the documents put the lie to Obama's famous declaration that his administration was not tarnished by even a smidgen of corruption. Now it seems there are smidgen droppings all over the place. Now there's corruption in plain sight, as Adam Schiff used to say about Trump-Russia collusion. Oh, the evidence is in plain sight. It's right out there in front of us, he kept saying over and over and over again. I'll get to a montage we put together on Adam Schiff here in just a moment. It says here, just one final quote, could Trump have stopped all of this Russia collusion hoax? Could he have stopped all of this once he took office? Could he have discovered the full scope of earlier surveillance? Not without trusted aides who understood counterintelligence. He had only one. So remember, it was somewhat chaotic because there were a lot of people that didn't want to work for Donald Trump in that transition period. But he had one individual in particular that could have exposed it from the very beginning. And who was that? Well, that was Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. It says, not without trusted aides who understood counterintelligence. He had only one. Michael Flynn, his new national security advisor, had run the Defense Intelligence Agency, so he knew all about it. He would have smelled all of this rot from the beginning and would have exposed it. And so that's why, going back to January 5, 2017, that's why Obama and his top officials, including Joe Biden, That's why they conspired to go after Michael Flynn first. We've got to get him out because he'll expose us. Sam brought up a good point just this morning that he thinks this is why they put forward Joe Biden as the candidate for this go-round, even though so many people see he's obviously a bad candidate and probably has no chance against Donald Trump, and he's in decline, he's older, and so on. I don't want to dwell on that more than I have to. But he's also connected to Barack Obama, and he was there in that meeting, January 5th. And Sam was saying this is maybe their way of countering this investigation into the investigators in the months ahead. If you start hearing them say, "Well, you're going after us because Joe Biden's your opponent, and you can't investigate your political opponent." See, the very things they were doing and are still doing, in some ways, they're probably going to level that charge at the Trump administration, William Barr, and all the rest. Well, you can't. You've heard the media's reaction already. Why? Oh, why could you even focus on this when we're in the midst of a pandemic? Some of you might have seen the montage put together yesterday on Brian Stelter. We had the clips from him Monday and Tuesday, but that clip from Sunday where he said, "How could you be focusing on Russia?" And then the rest of the montage was him talking about Russia, Bob Mueller, Russia, the Russian probe, collusion. And then finally he's asked at the end of the montage, "Well, do you think there was this collusion between President Trump and Vladimir Putin?" And he said, I wish I could say no. So he was a believer. And now he says, don't even talk about it. Just don't talk about it. We don't have time for it on the 24 hours of news each day. No time for that. Here's what the Wall Street Journal had to say yesterday about Adam Schiff in particular. It says, Americans expect that politicians will lie, but sometimes the examples are so brazen that they deserve special notice. Newly released congressional testimony shows that Adam Schiff spread falsehoods shamelessly about Russia and Donald Trump for 3 years, even as his own committee gathered contrary evidence. He was on the committee. They were gathering evidence that said in plain view there's no collusion. And so what did he say in front of the cameras? There's collusion. I've got direct evidence. And he said it for years. He said it even last week when he had to release all the transcripts. It says here, the House Intelligence Committee last week released 57 transcripts of interviews it conducted in its investigation into Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. The committee probe started in January 2017 under then-Chair Devin Nunes and concluded in March 2018 with a report finding no evidence that the Trump campaign conspired with the Kremlin. Most of the transcripts were ready for release long ago, but Schiff oddly refused to release them after he became chairman in 2019. He only released them last week when the White House threatened to do it first. It says, finally, now we know why. From the earliest days of the collusion narrative, Mr. Schiff insisted that he had evidence proving the plot. And so if you're watching the YouTube stream, you can see the date stamps on all of these examples of what Adam Schiff was saying early on in 2017 and all the way through. I think the last one here is at the end of 2019, and you could tack on what he said last week after the release of the transcripts. He still believes. No evidence, no facts, but he still believes. Here's what Adam Schiff was saying, even as his committee was gathering evidence to the contrary. This is clip one.
There is circumstantial evidence of collusion. I also think in addition to that circumstantial evidence, there's very direct evidence of deception. Reviewing the evidence that I have.
All you have right now is a circumstantial case.
Actually, no, Chuck. I can tell you that the case is more than that, and I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence. There's certainly evidence that was presented in his testimony that the president may have sought to interfere or obstruct the investigation. Here you have now evidence in black and white. Real evidence is coming forward that just can't be ignored. Palpable evidence.
So you said earlier this week about the Russia investigation, quote, you really have to be trying to look away to say there's no evidence of collusion here.
It's not for lack of evidence.
Which I want to make sure we're being precise in our conversation. Can you agree that there has been no evidence of collusion, coordination, or conspiracy that has been presented thus far between the Trump campaign and Russia?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I think there's plenty of evidence of we're doing our own investigation, and we've revealed evidence, I think, that certainly goes to the issue of conspiracy and collusion. So there's clear evidence on the issue of collusion, and this adds to that body of evidence. There's ample evidence of collusion in plain sight, and that is true.
Have Democrats found any evidence of collusion?
Yes, we have. You can see evidence in plain sight on the issue of collusion, pretty compelling evidence. And there is significant evidence of collusion. There is ample evidence, and indeed there is, of collusion of people in the Trump campaign with the Russians. All of this is evidence of collusion. There is significant evidence of collusion between the campaign and Russia. Of course, there's ample evidence of collusion. To not see what is plainly in front of us means you basically don't want to see the evidence of collusion because it is quite abundant.
Have you seen, do you have direct evidence of collusion with Russia?
Well, I think there is direct evidence. That, to me, is direct evidence. But there's also abundant circumstantial evidence, full evidence of circumstantial evidence. While there's abundant evidence of collusion, plenty of evidence of collusion and corrupt commingling of, I've always said, while there was ample evidence of collusion, more abundant evidence, the evidence is already overwhelming. The remarkable thing about this, and we've done this with almost, well, literally no documentary production from the administration, is the facts are really not contested.
The facts are not contested. That was from just late last year. So how do you convince someone like that with evidence and facts? None of what he was saying in that montage was true. None of it. And as we now know, James Clapper, Loretta Lynch, these are all Obama officials, keep in mind. Clapper, Lynch, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Ben Rhodes, Samantha Power. Have you seen any evidence of Trump-Russia collusion? No, haven't seen any. Under oath, they said no evidence. Under oath, no evidence. Before the cameras, the evidence is everywhere. And then the media they just run with it. Chuck Todd, if you're just looking at the other side, he took some video from just a couple days ago, Attorney General Barr, and he edited it just the way it would say what he wanted it to say. And it said exactly the opposite of what William Barr said. So that's what they do to try to deceptively. Now, he's since come forward and apologized. Well, it wasn't really an apology. It was, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, but it really wasn't my mistake. That's the kind of apology that it was. But that's what they'll do to try to twist the words of Attorney General Barr or President Trump or whoever on the other side. And then here it's exposed now that they were lied to. How many times did Adam Schiff go on Jake Tapper's show or Chuck Todd's show and peddle these lies, these conspiracy theories? They were lied to. And they don't come out and attack Adam Schiff. Certainly not. They're not going to attack him no matter how many times he lied. He's on their side. These are Democrat activists that are working on CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and on and on and on it goes. And in a lot of ways, they are more radical than even some of the politicians that they cover, and more willing to lie. And they have the audacity to ask the new press briefing. Well, the gal that's heading that up now, I forget her name. But they want her to pledge that she's always going to tell the truth. And these people they were spreading these lies for years and years and years. In 2017, Schiff said the Russians offered help. The campaign, that's the Trump campaign, accepted help. The Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help. Collusion! And he still believes it. It doesn't matter how much evidence is presented to the contrary. It does not matter. So when you think about the spirit behind this, Revelation 12:9, John 8:44, it says that the devil's the father of lies and that there is no truth in him. No truth. My father said in the Nunes memo article, this is from more than 2 years ago now, he said, how can you explain President Obama's many lies and the willingness of the American people to accept them? How do you explain this? At the end of the Wall Street Journal piece, they asked their friends in the media, when are you going to stop playing the fool by putting Schiff on the air? When will you stop this charade, this hoax? Well, they're not going to stop anytime soon. The Wall Street Journal's just being nice about it. My father's a bit more direct, as you would expect. How do you explain these many lies and the willingness of so many people to believe it? To just believe it. You know, one of our listeners sent me a comment yesterday. He was talking about his extended family. They're not members or supporters of this church. They don't listen to this program. But he just made an observation that they've been in lockdown, and the older ones of the family, the grandparents, they're the ones that are the primary concern, and they've been very faithful, staying indoors. They used to be grandparents that just their whole lives revolved around family, their children, spending time with their grandchildren. And he said they've always been so happy and so positive. And he said what's really been hard to watch as they've confined themselves to their apartment is just how negative they are now. They're watching more cable news. They're indoors. There's lots of things at play here. But if you're indoors at all times and you're tuning into CNN, think about what kind of an impact that has on your thinking, on your mind, on your outlook. Now, look, overall, the world is a very, very dark place, and I'm certainly not blaming it all on CNN. But it's interesting, isn't it, to just think about the influence that these people still have. They still have it. They've been thoroughly discredited, and yet look at the power they still have. These poor older people that generally speaking, they're just happy to spend time with their family and their grandchildren. But now Donald Trump is evil, and we've got to stay indoors for who knows how long. Forget about family, forget about jobs, forget about getting outside. This is what they're told to do. Primarily by the media, the medical experts, the politicians, the radical left in particular. They want to see this lockdown go on forever. So my father, coming back to these lies, he says, how do you explain it? Not many observers of the Obama presidency recognized what was really happening. See, again, this is what puts the trumpet out front. This is what puts the key of David and this radio show out in front. Because not many people recognize what's really happening, what's really behind this, the spirit that's behind it. He says the reality is that President Obama hated and wanted to destroy the foundation of Western civilization, Judeo-Christian religion and morality. His administration provided plenty of proof of Satan in action. Now, that's a strong statement. Reading it in April 2018, you could have thought, even then, boy, I don't know about that. But look at what we're seeing today. He says this happened under the previous presidential administration, and the Nunes memo shows that it is still happening under high-ranking FBI and Justice Department officials planted there by Barack Obama during his presidency. And then later on he says, so the mainstream media has been complicit in this lawless plot. They are in bed together, in some cases literally. Sam's working on a segment just with respect to how many people in the media are married to these radical Democrats or family members, their brothers, their mothers and fathers. They're all in it together. It says they continually give credibility to this nonsense. And now it's exposed, and what does CNN say? We don't have time to cover this. How do you explain Fox News' obsession with the Russia probe? Suddenly, Fox News is obsessed with Russia. He says, where would America be right now if the radical left had won the last election? That was 2 years ago. 2 days ago, you saw that same statement at Real Clear Politics. Where would America be? Here's another one. Watergate is trivial compared to the lawlessness of today's radical left. President Trump tweeted that out just a couple days ago. This is from my father's article, April 2018. He says the radical left is lawless. They are satanically sick. These people no longer deal in logic because they've been overwhelmed by the devil. What you saw in that montage is an example of someone who's been overwhelmed by the devil. Overwhelmed. You think the devil is going to look at the evidence and say, I guess I got it wrong. I got it wrong for 3 years. I've gotten it wrong for 3,000 years. For millions of years, ever since I rebelled against my maker, I got it wrong, and I'm sorry. The devil is not going to do that. The devil can't do that. And you see, in looking around, you see more and more people just being overwhelmed by the devil. This case against Mike Flynn, that too, the documents that have come out since the DOJ decided to dismiss it last week, it's exposed the devil's handiwork. This is from the New York Post. It says the best way to understand the dismissal, it's talking about both the dismissal of the case and then the congressional testimony that we now have transcripts of. It says the best way to understand the dismissal of the phony prosecution case against General Mike Flynn and the release of secret congressional testimonies is to imagine a giant jigsaw puzzle. We know the final picture will show a broad conspiracy by law enforcement and intelligence agencies under Barack Obama to undermine Donald Trump's campaign and to help Hillary Clinton win the 2016 election. That's the real collusion. That's the real meddling in the election. And they want to do it again this year. Anything they can to return to power. He says when that failed, many of those same people turned their efforts to sabotaging Trump's presidency. Some are still at it. That's the big picture. That's the big picture. And of course, when you read America Under Attack, you see that big picture and more, because you see Satan behind it. He says, in formally dropping the Flynn prosecution, the Department of Justice released a trove of documents showing there was no crime. They proved the FBI knew Flynn had done nothing wrong in talking to the Russian ambassador after the election. They also show agents knew he didn't lie to them in a meeting they tricked him into holding. You see all of that in the evidence, in the facts, and yet here comes the judge yesterday saying, I'm not going to dismiss the case. We're going to let someone else, some other attorney come in. If the DOJ doesn't want to take this, we'll bring in some other attorney and continue on with this. What's the spirit behind that move? Doesn't matter the evidence. Doesn't matter that you dismiss it. We'll get a so-called friend of the court to come in and take care of this, to see this through. So says the judge, and of course the radical left, they love this. They love activist judges who disregard the facts and the evidence and just continue on committing these crimes, these phony prosecutions. Think for a moment how the reaction might be if there's actual prosecutions on the other side. Can you even imagine? It's kind of hard to even imagine it, truthfully. Some of these top Obama officials actually being prosecuted. If that's where this goes, how's the radical left going to accept that? What will be their reaction to that? You certainly see both sides digging in their heels, and it's leading to Ezekiel 4 and 5. Listen to Joe Biden yesterday when he was asked by Stephanopoulos about that January 5th meeting and the investigation into Michael Flynn. Clip 2.
I do want to ask you about Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor to President Trump, and the move by the Justice Department last week to dismiss the case against him for lying to the FBI. The president said yesterday that that move is justified because President Obama targeted Flynn. He called it, quote, the biggest political crime in U.S. history. Your former Senate colleague Charles Grassley has added that Flynn was entrapped and asked on the Senate floor, what did Obama and Biden know? When did they know it? So what did you know about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, and was there anything improper done?
I know nothing about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, number one.
He knows nothing about the move to investigate Mike Flynn? He was in the meeting on January 5th. And if he wasn't sleeping, he heard the plot as it was explained by Barack Obama. I know nothing about the moves to investigate Michael Flynn. Now, Stephanopoulos, to his credit, he at least, after Joe Biden says that, look, this is just a distraction, he's taking the Brian Stelter strategy to heart. This is a distraction. We shouldn't even be talking about this, George. Don't even bring this up. We're in a pandemic right now. So you can't even discuss it. In their minds, it's not even an option. This is a distraction, he said. All of this is a distraction. It's coming from Trump's people. And then to his credit, as I say, Stephanopoulos came back to this because he was in the meeting on January 5th. Here's clip 3.
You say you didn't know anything about it, but you were reported to be at a January 5th, 2017 meeting where you and the president were briefed on the FBI's plan to question Michael Flynn over those conversations he had with the Russian ambassador Kislyak.
Now, I thought you asked me whether or not I had anything to do with him being prosecuted.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was aware that they asked for an investigation, but that's all I know about it.
So it's his first statement, this is in the same interview, he said, I knew nothing about those moves to investigate Mike Flynn. And then Stephanopoulos, 2 seconds later, says, you were in the meeting on January 5th. And he says, I was aware that they asked for an investigation. So now he is aware. And who is they? They would be Barack Obama. They asked for an investigation. Why? Based on what evidence? There was no evidence. All that they had was that he made a phone call, a completely legal phone call, to a Russian ambassador. And what were they doing? They're trying to tie it somehow to the Logan Act. And then there was the Comey setup, the 2 agents that showed up, the Washington Post story the day before the ambush that said Mike Flynn's not part of this. He's clean. He didn't do anything unlawful with this. And then the next day they spring it on him. You don't need a lawyer. We're just having a friendly chat. And so they get him on a misstatement A lie that the two FBI officials didn't even believe was a lie. They wanted to keep that going for years and years and years. The judge in the case, he wants to keep it going even this week, as was announced yesterday. Never mind what the DOJ does in dismissing it. We've got to keep it going. See, the spirit coming from the father of lies, it is strong. It shows, like my father said in that article, it shows just how many people are being overwhelmed by the devil. When we come back, we'll carry on with our Bible study from yesterday. The attitude that we need, especially in the world we're living in today, the attitude that we need to build up and strengthen the God family. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Today's free offer is Herbert W. Armstrong's book, The Incredible Human Potential. During the 20th century, Mr. Armstrong was recognized and respected by leaders in government, industry, and education around the world. He was even known as an unofficial ambassador for world peace. In The Incredible Human Potential, you will learn why man hasn't known the way to peace. Request The Incredible Human Potential. All of our literature is free, and all of your information remains secure. Email your request to td@kpcg.fm or visit thetrumpet.com. The Trumpet Daily.
On yesterday's program, we talked about the attitude that builds God's family, John 8 and verse 28, just to repeat a few of the verses that we went to. It says, "Then Jesus said to them, 'When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then shall you know that I am he, and that I do nothing of myself. But as my Father has taught me, I speak these things.'" So he came to this earth, Jesus did, not to do his own will, not to carry out his own will, but to carry out the Father's will, as I said yesterday. He wasn't trying to be original, as they say today. He was a chip off the old block. He wanted to reflect the Father's glory. You can actually even see more on that in Hebrews 1, verses 1 and 2. But verse 29 here, in John 8, it says, "And he that sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone, for I do always those things that please him." I'm always doing what I can to please the Father, not just to obey him, not just to carry out his instructions, but to please him, to support him, to love him, to help him, to confide in him, to open up to him, to seek his guidance, his counsel, to receive his correction. My Father says in John's Gospel, that is the beautiful attitude that will build the family of God. I quoted that yesterday, I know, but this is the beautiful attitude that builds up the family. It builds up God's family. It strengthens those family bonds. It strengthens a marriage. It strengthens the relationship between parents and children. If we're doing all that we can to please the one we support, the one we report to, the supervisor, the head, the Father. John 7, just to repeat this verse again, verse 18, it says, "He that speaks of himself seeks his own glory, but he that seeks his glory that sent him, the same is true, and no unrighteousness is in him." If we're seeking the glory of God, the thing about this, just to tie this to the first segment for a moment, is that if you're seeking the glory of God, you are dwelling in the truth. You're dwelling in God's truth. You're dwelling in the purity of God's truth, in the strength of God's truth. You're standing on a firm foundation. The world wants to reject the revelation from God, the teachings from the Father, and rely instead on observation, experimentation, that sort of scientific method, as Herbert Armstrong talked about in Missing Dimension in Sex. Human reasoning. Lots and lots of flawed human reasoning. Lots of human reasoning in the testimony yesterday. I think if we come out of this too quickly, this could happen. This might happen. This could be a problem. This many people could die. It's just all one individual's opinion, and then others have their opinions. Philippians 2 and verse 3. Philippians 2 and verse 3, it says, "Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than themselves." Lowliness in mind. Contrast this with the spirit of the age. You can read about that in 2 Timothy 3. It says that people are high-minded. They're haughty. They're vain. High-minded, as Paul said. He's talking about the last days. In the last days, perilous times will come. You know the passage. And then he says people are high-minded. Here it says the mind of Christ. Lowliness of mind. Let each esteem others better than themselves. Verse 4 continues, "Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others." Consider the needs of other people. Consider the needs of your family. Think about the sacrifices. If it's a loving family, if God's government is there in that family, think about the sacrifices made for one another. The Father leading the way. But if everyone is in that same spirit, if everyone has that same John 8:29 attitude, what a family. Well, that's the attitude that Jesus Christ had. And that's why the two of them, God the Father and Christ the Son, that's why they walk together. That's Amos 3 and verse 3. That's why, as it says in John 1, you have Christ who is with, the Word was with God. In other words, he was in the bosom of the Father. That's how close these two were and are. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. This is the mindset. That's Philippians 2 and verse 5. This is the John 8:29 attitude that God wants us to let in. Let it in. Let that mindset in. Philippians 4 and verse 8, a couple pages over, it says, finally, this is Paul writing, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report." Look at that. Honest, just, pure, lovely, of good report. Before all of that, what does he say? Whatsoever things are true. The truth. He says, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Think on the truth. Meditate on the truth. Meditate on God's perfect character. Meditate on the Father's virtues. Think on these things. And verse 9 says, those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do. And the God of peace shall be with you. So follow this example, says Paul. Follow the example that I've set for you. Let this mind in. the mind of Jesus Christ, he said in chapter 2. And I've done my best, he tells the brethren. I've tried to set an example for you. This is the character God has built within me. And now you go and follow in that same example. Be followers of me. Paul said this often in his writings. Take full advantage of that good example that's there in front of you. I was reading a little bit yesterday from this book on Douglas MacArthur by William Manchester. And there's a touching section in there about just how a young Douglas revered his father. He loved his father. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. We've talked before about the disadvantages of Winston Churchill in his youth, his upbringing. He, too, really wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, but the difference there, of course, is that his father hated him. Young Winston always tried to please his father, but his father was never there for him. His father didn't love him. But here is an example. Douglas MacArthur and his father Arthur, a wonderful father-son relationship, a loving father-son relationship. And Douglas wanted to follow in the example, in the footsteps, in the career path of his dad. He took full advantage of that example that was out in front of him, in his own household. Titus 2, in verse 9, it says, "Exhort servants to be obedient unto their own masters, and to please them well in all things, not answering again." Paul says, tell servants to, this isn't, you look at this by today's standards. Is this really what we want? A servant, after all. Who wants to be a servant to somebody? Paul says, look, tell the servants to be obedient and to strive to please their masters. That's the John 8:29 attitude. God says, bring that even into the workplace. Please the boss. Try it and see if that doesn't result in some promotions. Verse 10, it says, not purloining, but showing all good fidelity, that they may adorn the doctrine of God, our Savior, in all things. Do everything that you can to try to please the master. Be the best possible assistant and supporter that you can be. Don't just quickly answer back, as it says in verse 9. Purloining means to carry away for oneself. Again, keep in mind Philippians 2, what we just read. Consider the needs of others. Certainly for that principle, we ought to consider the needs of our boss, our supervisor, the head of the family, our father. The John 8:29 mindset, the John 8:29 attitude, the attitude, the mindset that builds the family of God, that strengthens the family of God, that reinforces God's love in the body of Christ, in the work of the church. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. One of these days we'll get into some feedback. We've got quite a few emails that have come in, but we just haven't had the extra time at the end to get into it. But if you'd like to email the program, as many people are, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We thank you for joining us on today's show, and we'll see you tomorrow.